we're moving now into the first of our OT panel sessions for the day. See everyone's popping on. We're going to have a conversation focused on how emerging threats are shaping or reshaping the cybersecurity landscape for manufacturers. So from ransomware and supply chain attacks to the rise of AI, some of the things that Sachin covered in his quick 200 years.
Sure.
The OT threat environment is evolving fast, and security leaders are being challenged to adapt just as quickly. So this session really brings together a great deal of experience, and experience in the form of industrial cybersecurity voices from across the manufacturing sector. Excuse me. So they're going to share insights, and as always, we will leave time at the end for Q&A. So just hit that button and submit your questions when you have them. So you've already met Sachin. Now let's meet the rest of our panel very quickly. Manolya, why don't you kick us off?
Sure.
Yes,
Yep.
good morning. Thank you for joining. My name is Manolya Rowe. I am a cybersecurity architect, engineer, previous life CISO for almost close to 20 years in the industry. Started my career as a OT security officer in the nuclear industry in Germany, Finland, and Norway. Moved quickly then to critical infrastructure, and now work for Dover Fueling Solutions in Austin. And I'm very happy to be here.
Perfect. Thank you. Reynaldo, why don't you go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Pleasure to be here. So thanks, everyone, for joining. Yes, I'm Reynaldo Gonzalez. I'm a principal cybersecurity architect for a manufacturing company. We build the engines, the diesel engines, and different components. So I started my career actually on the IT and network side. I have a background doing a lot of consulting and doing like network architecture solutioning that area for many years. And then I support a lot of customers when I was on the vendor side doing in the US, Central, South America, and in Europe. And then over the last several years, I transitioned into the OT space, supporting the aviation, now manufacturing. And so right now just helping support or leading our program for our OT manufacturing. So good to meet everybody.
Perfect. Thank you. And Chris, last but not least.
Yes, Chris McLaughlin. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Johns Manville. We make insulation and roofing products. We're also part of Berkshire Hathaway, so I work a lot with the other Berkshire Hathaway companies. I've been with JM for 30 years, which is kind of crazy. One of the things, I've been heavily involved in the industrial security kind of community, certainly in Denver and within Berkshire. I'm the co-chair of the ISA GCA, so the International Society of Automation Global Cyber Security Alliance. And essentially that group is a nonprofit that really supports the 62443 standards and just bringing awareness about the standards and how to keep industrial systems as secure as we can.
Perfect. Thank you all. So why don't we jump straight into, we have a number of questions for the panel. As I said, feel free to submit any questions that you have for the panel via the Q&A. I can see some already coming in. We haven't quite started yet. So fantastic. Let's start with this one. Name one concrete step that you have taken in your organization in the past 6 months or so to improve the cyber resilience. And what impact did it have? So, Manolya, why don't we start with you?
Yes. So in my job, I not only are responsible for the manufacturing side of our production, but also the engineering part, because in our company, IT, OT works and engineering works very closely together. So the challenge here for me is not just only look at the OT processes, but also look at engineering, cloud, and IT and how that orchestrates. So by focusing of bringing everybody to the table and getting a better overview what goes on in each of the, I want to call them environment, right? Cloud environment, OT environment, engineering environment. I found out a lot of information that if you're just focused on one of the areas in the solo will probably not had oversight. So for me, orchestrating the three different environments and the work streams and the processes and looking at the critical assets in each gave me a great plan for the next 6 to 12 months to mature my program and improve.
Okay, fantastic. Sachin, why don't you chime in here, share some of your
Sure.
wisdom?
Over I wouldn't call it last 6 months, but over the years, one of the first thing I'd probably say I get acquainted working for any company or industry is to go visit the factory or the manufacturing floors. And it's not necessarily what I'm saying. It's an advocating that you must visit all factories on worldwide. No, you're not going the world tour. You're trying to understand the established processes and how things work. I tell you, I get more things done talking about the instrumentation and control lingo than I can talk on IT. IT, yes, we can. So it's all about understanding the language. These people, out of respect, we always think cybersecurity is smarter, but I tell you, instrumentation and control engineers are way smarter than cybersecurity people because they really, really understand how the end of the day that particular factory and the edge device works. And this is where I always say, you have to go above and beyond. What you know is not what you really don't know is what you really need to know. So collaborating with the people on the floor, understanding the processes and their pain points, and that's where you solve the problems. You have to get your hands dirty, is what I meant, and that's what we try to collaborate, and then you bring those data sets, converge. If you're part of an IT group or part of a cybersecurity group or reporting into CISO or being a CISO, is how to convey those physical sets of informations that other side of the house really understands. And then that intersection is also very, I would say, I wouldn't call it diplomatic, but you have to play some diplomatic way because IT always say, hey, my standard is moving into this new operating systems. But when you go onto the floor, that will never work. And that's what you have to enumerate as to how to convey the consequences driving into the cybersecurity, understanding your physical world.
Perfect. Okay. Why don't we move along to the next question? So this one looks at how you're ensuring, and I think this sort of piggybacks on what Sachin mentioned as well, how are you ensuring that the engineering and operations and other teams that you need to interface are actually involved in things like cyber security response and recovery planning, etc. So Chris, why don't you take this one?
Okay. One of the key things I think is that industrial security risks, and like if you look at a ransomware kind of event, that's not an engineering or an IT issue, it's a business issue. And so, what you have to do is you have to make sure that you're looking at it at the executive level, that this is a business risk and this is going to impact both sides. And so there has to be a partnership. And that's a complicated thing, building that partnership, but there's got to be engagement. I think, some specific things that you could do. I think most companies have you should hopefully have a good incident response plan. Your IT side may have something that says, okay, here's what we're going to do in the event of a cyber event, but things that should be considered and where you want to get your manufacturing plants involved are, okay, we have let's say likely event, some kind of big corporate industrial security event, ransomware, let's say. Do you know how to disconnect your corporate and OT environments? What are the impacts? So do a tabletop and talk through what are the impacts if we disconnect these systems, or can you shut things down? How do you, on an industrial side, we've go through scenarios with plants a lot, and the question is, can you actually shut down your operations if you, for some reason, lost HMIs? So it's those kinds of things. I think it's scenario based, and I think it has to be both sides, the IT and the OT teams together, walking through that. And as as it was mentioned before, I think the engineers have exceptional skills. IT has exceptional skills. The best world is where they can both learn from each other and gain from their experience, and you could value both of those as you go through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Manolya, would you like to chime in on that one as well?
Yeah, I have a very similar view on that. So we certify here at Dover when we build the fueling solutions and fueling systems with different certifications, right? Some of them are mandated by the government, like PCI for payment, and some of them we do just to be at the front with our security built in our product, because we want to have a competitive edge and we want to provide our customers with the requirements that they are looking for. So with that being said, we certify our systems with a SOC 2 Type 2. And whenever you go through a SOC 2 Type 2 certification, it's very extensive, and it requires you to do multiple tabletop exercises like Chris had mentioned. So when we do these exercises, I do go walk on the shop floor, because we have everything and everybody basically here in Austin. So I can just walk over and tell them to come over. We're doing an exercise, tell the engineers, tell the cloud colleagues to come. So the key here is not only having those policies, but also living it, right? Doing those tabletop exercises, even if you're not getting a certification, because for some companies and organization, a certification might be too out of proportion, but you can always align yourself to a certification, which means you can follow the processes and do the exercises that you would need to do. So by exercising tabletops and incident response and disaster recovery at least every 6 months, it stays fresh in the mind of everybody, and it really, really helps to go through a real real-time situation if it comes up, because everybody knows what to do, who to talk to, how to proceed, how to coordinate, and what to do and what not to do.
And that's a great point, and it kind of leads us right into the next question, just by chance. But what's one of the foundational controls, I guess, that you think organizations should prioritize in the next 6 months, and why? And I think we'll head back to Reynaldo for that one. Is that okay?
Yes, hello. So yeah, I mean, I would start this with, it depends on the level of maturity of the organization. So where you are today, some organizations may be very early in the journey, some are already pretty advanced, and some are kind of in between. They're already done some areas. Really, like financial controls, it could be many different options to go with, but you always got to start with the visibility side. So if you're early in the journey, visibility is very key. You need to be able to know what's in your environment, so you can know what you can protect, what kind of controls you can put in place if you're trying to do segmentation, if you're trying to control around remote access. If you have visibility already in place, then other foundational controls can be things around improving your hygiene of the environment, whether it comes to the identity side. If some environments you may have separation between IT and OT, especially in the in the AD space, if it's a converged environment or if it's actually separated, or if it's other areas around where you're doing segmentation. So what it comes down to is understanding the current state. You should always have the visibility in place. If you have that in place, then look at things around maybe how you apply privileged access for remote access. Typically, that tends to be something that is often unmanaged with shared a lot of users. There tends to be many different vendor solutions or options that are out there that are coming directly from the business. And if you have the right processes in place, then and you have a way to determine there's an approved method or an approved standard, then you want to leverage that approach. Beyond that, you can leverage the details, the data of those assets that are discovered by visibility, feed it into your remote access solution or controls, and be able to apply more logical policies more efficient, faster. That can also, the data from also the visibility side can also feed into your segmentation policies. If you have some tool out there that can take that data and leverage that to then apply those controls, then you can have a more efficient, faster type deployment. So really what it comes down to is kind of the level of maturity.
Yeah, great point. And Sachin, do you have a quick point to add to that?
Sure. The first and foremost control I would always start is, defense in depth. Where does it start? It doesn't start with IT. It starts with the physical security. So if I don't have a physical security controls enumerated in terms of how this infrastructure are protected, that's the most critical one. Because I've seen many times the neglections where I can literally run a red team testing and I can have a third party going to many of these manufacturing facilities without a single question being asked. You just have to look alike and then you're already in. And that's where, how does that, your weakest link becomes the most important. And that's what people look at it from the outside in. So yeah, I always start with, physical security.
Great point too. Perfect. So again, sticking with the sort of 6 months time frame, what do you see is the most likely cyber threat to your organization? I realize this could be different to everyone. And sort of how are you preparing for it? So Manolya, why don't you take us off?
So I think we saw, if you keep up with the data and you kind of look into what's going on in the manufacturing industry, I think manufacturing industry have always been a target, but I think it's becoming more and more a target the more we are connected and the more we have entry points. And to be quite honestly, if you're in this industry, the manufacturing industry is sometimes an easy target because in the evolution of security, it started I want to say it started very strongly when we were starting to get aware of, okay, hey, we have IT, right? But then we have to have some security on top of the IT. And then we moved on to, hey, let us also look at OT and manufacturing. So sometimes some companies pay a little bit more attention to the IT side of things, and the OT side of things get maybe not neglected, but maybe are not on the plan of maturity, and perhaps it's also the truth that maybe they can't find people who are knowledgeable in that specific career field, right? In that space of OT. So I think I expanded really, really far just to say my biggest concerns right now would be, I think it's for me supply chain, because at Dover I think we have a great maturity when we look at network segmentation, all the classical security controls that you would be finding probably under IEC 62443, which my boss in Germany was a contributor from Germany, and I co-authored that standard. So I am more concerned at the next 6 months with supply chain security. And why do I say that? Because supply chain is not anymore the same as 15 years ago. We get sometimes parts, systems, subsystems delivered to us that get into our manufacturing processes that have preloaded firmware or software on it, right? So I need to have the ability to randomly test these components and not just only rely on the papers and contracts we have with the suppliers saying, yeah, we will supply you components and boxes with secure software, but I need to make sure it is secured. So I have to go back in the lab, on our security lab, and test these systems and subsystems, and make sure that everything is up to our standards, what we adhere to. So I would say, to sum it up, it's probably supply chain for me.
Thanks. And Reynaldo, what does that look like in your environment?
Sure. So it's yeah, Manolya touched on really good points, and I agree with her. Like, it's supply chain and the is an area that's also a concern. It still starts with, like, I saw someone commented on the chat, people being a weak link. It's, we people, we're so trusting of things that happen in our daily lives, whether it's work or personal. So the issues always start there at some point. But when that comes into the workforce, now talk about in our environment, there's that depends on the current state and where you are with how you have different types of controls from the IT side, the OT side, and in between. So things that really stand out to me that I tend to look at more, besides having part of the foundation, like we talked about a moment ago, the controls, there's also the way things can move around the environment. So spillover from an IT compromise that moves into your OT side or IoT side, and understanding what does that look like? What are the potential attack surface directions that it can take, even internally, not just externally. But if some compromise happens on the IT side, is your security posture, your hygiene with how you manage the security components in those paths and those different points between IT and OT, is that well controlled? Is that well protected? And are there any potential loopholes that can be used, or jump points where it can move laterally? So having that kind of view of that ladder of movement is something that we got to be on the lookout for. On the third party supply chain, it kind of holds a bit equal value for me too, because when it comes to the vendors or all these third party suppliers, there's so many out there that get engaged with a business. There's so many different initiatives and projects, and they're looking at innovating and bringing more this growing more the business and the operations. They bring in the revenue. The business brings in the revenue. They're making the money for the company. So there's a lot of interaction with these solutions that on the third party side, some have a pretty good security posture. Some don't have any security posture, don't look at security. And that's an area we got to look at too, where how is the controls or the way that you're bringing in of the supply chain and even the firmware of those different third-party components are being looked at. So having some method to check that. One other quick thing also related to that is when it comes to the IT to OT, the M&A side, the mergers and acquisitions, sometimes that can be a risk depending on when you buy another company or merges into another environment. The security postures can be different. There could be different types of controls, sometimes conflicting, and that can end up introducing some gaps or cause some other concerns around potential ladder of movement. So we got to be able to look at a few kind of collectively, but take the right importance for each of those.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially about the maturity. Sorry, Manolya, did you want to add something now?
Yeah, I wanted to add on to Reynaldo's, who extended basically, and I think we're in great agreement, but we should also think about that each of us are also suppliers to our customers, correct? Like, we not only have suppliers, but we are also suppliers to another business. So what I also have witnessed in the last 6 months, that they are also paying very very strong attention to their suppliers. So their requirements are coming down to us now. So not only I have to make sure that I look at my suppliers and the security of the suppliers provided system subsystems, but also being able to comply with my customers' security requirements as a supplier, because I think the trend is going to go very quick, very fast into, if you're not complying with my supply chain security requirements, you cannot be a supplier for me anymore. So it really becomes a business competitive edge and not just a nice to have.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
valid
great
point.
points. Okay, so sticking with this sort of concept of what can we do in the short term, we'll head back to Reynaldo again. If you want to kick us off, what I guess have you learned or lessons learned that so from a quick and dirty, but something that's quick and practical sort of implementation that maybe works better than you expected?
Mhm. Yeah, what this ends up coming down to is budget, right? So do you have, the resources that can take on some new initiative if you have a solution you're thinking about? Or do you even have the money to bring in a solution that addresses a particular challenge? So the quick and dirty, I mean, I guess it could depend on how you look at it, and it kind of goes back to part of the theme earlier is the maturity models, where you are today, the way you can do. Let's say, like one example, you don't have something like a visibility tool that gives you your insight into the environment, where you're not just getting the inventory of your assets, of your IT, OT, IoT, and look at the security posture of what can move laterally or kind of north-south. But if you had to do something like to start off somewhere, or maybe justify the use case, why we should be bringing in something like a visibility tool, but there's no budget for it. So you can do something like there's those applications like Wireshark, for example. Wireshark, you could use that to connect it to a switch and span it off a port to collect the traffic, and then use that traffic when you bring it into Wireshark, and then start doing that quick analysis to see what is talking to what. You can already identify some of the assets. That's kind of like a very quick and easy visibility view into the environment, but it is more kind of involved because you need to really look at the data. There is no tool, no GUI that is taking that information for you and giving you this insights. You have to kind of interpret that and look at that information. But that's one way of looking at something without having a tool yet to try to make a sense of what's happening in the environment. Other areas can be something like if some of these vendor solutions even offer some capable assessment tools that could maybe at least give you starting point for an insight, a snippet into your environment, provided those assessment tools, one, would align with any kind of policy requirements or doesn't deviate from any kind of violations in your security controls. If it's something that can be used, you can try that. But we got to look at often, do you have, the skill set you have, what can be able to run, and are you able to leverage something that is a free tool that doesn't cause any kind of security concerns or against your policies, is one way. But the other way, a simple way, something like the visibility is like a Wireshark. So that would be at least a good starting point to work with.
Fantastic. And Chris, would you like to weigh in on that one as well?
Yeah. And this is a different kind of quick and dirty fix. But years ago, when I first was grappling with trying to how do I build a bridge between IT and OT, and this is over a decade ago. One of the first things I did was recognize that I really have been on plant floors forever, but I don't know anything about engineering. So I backfilled a position with a controls engineer. And that immediately gave credibility to the controls group, the various groups. And then we've built that team since then because there's been value, and we recruit from within, from engineers and other people that understand it. So, we have a very good relationship. The other thing maybe, that might be easier and I think is just huge are, going to plants and doing a tabletop. Just do a simple tabletop. It's good if you have an engineer that kind of can create a scenario that's realistic. So the engineers are going to be like, oh, wow. Because what I find is when you get engagement and you also have them think about what the threats are, so they kind of get that perspective and we get their perspective in the discussion. So, you know, I think those are very quick and easy to do generally. And it brings more because you're not just walking through a problem, you're bringing people into the problem and thinking about it. And then they can proactively start saying, hey, what about this? You know, I was just thinking as we do this, we ought to think about this. And so they're kind of thinking through the threats that we're thinking about in kind of, you know, business terms, but we make sure they understand what the real impacts could be.
Everyone looks at it in
Yeah.
their own
Yeah.
worldview, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah,
If I
exactly.
could add something really quick.
Sure.
Sorry, John. If I have something just to add to what Chris mentioned, you know, there's also like taking that information, like the tabletop exercise, those conversations. Sometimes, you know, we have process. I mean, we have processes in place, and sometimes we don't have processes. But a lot of the information is either posted somewhere on a site. You kind of have to go look for it or have a link to it, or it might be like people know the process, but it's in their head. I think something that would help with this too, like a quick and dirty way, is when you have these conversations, like whether it's tabletop or in general, like what would be the process or steps we do when this happens, or who do we contact? Working with that same group and just whiteboard a simple process, you know, steps, you know, ABC or 1 through 5, that can be like a quick visual representation for people on the floor or those engineers, or even like working with IT and cyber on what to do and who to reach out to. That can also go a long way because you can have the content available on a computer or on a site or on a link, but it's something that I go look for, or if they bookmarked it, you have to find it. But if it's visual, there where they can see it and it's documented in an easy to follow step, that could be a really quick way to help understand the steps to take, and maybe whether it's part of the process or part of like next step, you know, in isolating some asset or some issue when they find something could be a way to address that. So I think that also visual side also would help.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's very good point as well. And I guess when so the next sort of area that we want to talk about and really sort of pick your brains is sort of like the one key lesson that you've learned from a recent or not so distant incident that helped shape your cybersecurity strategy and process, and I guess also feeds into those tabletop exercises that Chris, do you want to hit that one?
Yeah, let me start with that. So I think, you know, one of the things and actually I did it this week. So we do a annual threat risk assessment. And so threat scenario risk assessment. So we go through 8 or 10 different threat reports, look at past incidents. You know, a few that I think people ought to really look at, and one of them's older, one of them's a little newer. One is on backups. You know, one of the things that, you know, a lot of, we found early on that a lot of people just don't do very good backups, period. And if you get into, you know, if there is spillover, there's issues. But the other thing we did was we said, okay, what about sabotage? Because that's one of the common things is they'll sabotage the backups. And so we've really done a lot of work to make sure that we have immutable copies. You know, in industrial environments, generally you're going to back it up and there might be a system that does it, but you want a primary and a secondary, so you're kind of taking that stuff off site. It was interesting. I think even tapes become popular for a little while because it was like, okay, I can take that. In industrial systems, and it may be different, but they don't have to be backed up like a ERP in a lot of cases where every transaction could be lost. You want to make sure you have configuration and recoverability. The other one is groups specifically targeting, I saw in the comments about social engineering, but in particular, it's it's phone solicitation, that kind of thing, and targeting IT people with privileges. Now, if you kind of look at your environments, you'd say, okay, in an OT environment, who has privileges? And so you look at third-party integrators that may have access, really look at your higher level access individuals on the OT side and consider social engineering kinds of methods where, something could happen. So certainly those would be the two of the top ones for OT.
Great. And Sachin, what about yourself? Can you sort of name a lesson that you've learned from an incident that you've experienced?
Absolutely. So I think in my previous life, I generally never want to talk about the recent 6 months due to the non-disclosure and whatnot. But and this is remnants of, irrespective of the time frame of it, but it's an understanding of the factory floor. So in my previous life, we were walking into the factory, trying to talk to the people who runs the factory and trying to get some informations gathering that let's work together, let's protect the systems, we trust you, you trust us. And when you coming in from an IT, you always have to prove your worth. You have to understand we may be the smartest people in the world, but we don't know what we don't know down onto the factory. So after several days, I think on the third day when we were walking onto the factory, the INC lead for that shift, and we were in the area where it was a constructions was happening, right? So it was a close to the manufacturing. It was within the factory, and then he started talking about, okay, so Sachin, here is the deal. Great, you came along, you try to understand, and then he just took out one of the fuse from one of the panel, and said, now tell me, Sachin, how are you going to protect this? I said, holy smoke. So basically what he did is that fuse was basically covering the entire in and out of the factory. All the doors shut down automatically. It won't open. So whoever is inside is going to stay inside, and whoever is outside never going to come in until that fuse is going back physically into that panel. And basically, he was trying to show me the worth in terms of no matter how much we do all the resilience activity, all the single point of failure, there are always smart people in the world. They know how to break in. So we have to just to be ready in terms of, and this is one of the greatest lessons that I always learn. I always part of my, board of directors or CISO or C-level staff, there is always a residual risk. There is no such thing as a protection. It's always what you know, and what you don't know, you must learn. So part of it was I'm trying to say is absolutely some of the security controls, defense mechanism we always talk about. All right, so we need immutable backup recovery. Extremely, extremely, extremely critical, especially if you come from an IT side, because I've seen not only the backup, but one of the first notion that I learned, many of these factories are generally run by a system integrator or a third party vendor who comes in as an employee of your company and runs those plants. And the first thing I ask, okay, I need to see who owns the software licenses. And to my knowledge, it came about that yes, your company pays for it, but we own the software license. And it just boggles my mind that it's just impossible. Like we don't have that control to our own destinies when the software license, and when we are not talking about Microsoft license, or we're talking about the PLC and the OEMs softwares. So this is some of the things that you learn over the years and define and come back to that. Okay, what do we have? What is our stocks? What can we do? How can we improve upon? And the incidents like physical security I always mention, and also people in trust, and trust but verify. And I stick by those. Many times running, those principal architect for 35 mega factories, first thing I always say, you know what? I don't need an access to this information. Just because I know what it does, I have no business to know and have let's say root privilege on PLC. I'm never going to do PLC, screen or alarms and event. Similarly goes to my CIO and CEO. Just because you are in the position doesn't mean you have a need to know. And that's what would call it a least privilege. But to put that in a perspective, it's always, you have to understand how the defense mechanisms are working. Everybody wants, oh, I don't have a visibility, or I don't. These are some of the minutiae. No, you don't need it because it's not part of your job or responsibility. And again, we have to say it in a right way. But what I'm trying, maybe I'm coming out as a very strong word, but it's like we trust in people, but we verify also.
That's a good point. Let's take things up for a minute here. And I want to move on to the people side because I've seen it come up in the chat as well. People, everyone's talking about people being the weakest link, etc. We kind of look at that, you know, we look at people, process, technology. We look at people as the biggest challenge, not necessarily the weakest link. People are the most complex systems that we see. So, what would you say is the most actionable tactic that helped you build alignment between the people? So IT, OT, operations, engineering, might be finance, risk, etc. Reynaldo?
Yeah, so you know, I guess the idea like there's different things you got to look at. You know, so when we're trying to look at the way these, get think about the way the threats happen and what they're trying to address. So we have to be able to build those relationships. You know, if you know, there's two sides to this. One is having the right information, the threat feeds about what are the potential attack vectors that come into the OT. What are those attacks look like? What kind of threats are there? And knowing what that is in the environment of how do they exist or what can they do? How are attackers coming into the environment? The second part to that is if you understand that, then you have to build those relationships too. You have to work with those controls engineers and the business side so that you can work with using their lingo. And like we know from the cyber side of the risk and the issues and the different impacts they can have, but we can't really talk security in those terms that would help them work with us because they're in the business of keeping things going, keeping things operational. So we got to change our approach to having a more tactful discussion with words and lingo that they understand in their terms. Downtime, troubleshooting, you know, uptime, and the impact to production. So to have that kind of correlation, we need to understand, kind of like walk their shoes. And in walking their shoes also, having that kind of bridge where we build that way of walking the floor. So when we walk in their space, walk in their shadows, understand what they go through, what challenges they have, what are the things that they're trying to address, and they can also understand our perspective. So this all comes back to part of the relationship building, understanding how do you work with them, how do you talk to them, but having the insight that comes from the feeds of the attack vectors for OT and IoT, the way the attackers can get in, whether it's the architecture side, the PeopleSoft side, if it's broken processes that can allow for this thing to break in, then knowing what that is, but use that as leverage in terms that you can talk in their language and build those cross-functional support.
Yeah, great points. Communications and relationships and building trust is everything.
Yeah.
Manolya, what does that look like in Dover?
Yeah, I have to strongly agree with Reynaldo. Building those relationships are very, very important. Uh, and with that being said, you know, you have different stakeholders with different backgrounds, different experience and expectations. And our job, I think, is to come in and kind of translate the risk to the business and maybe to the product. So what does that look like? Sometimes I work with engineers. They're very much focused just on engineering and maybe their little niche of engineering. And when I come and present a thread to them, it's too much. They can't really see the entire picture. It's just like hard for them to think out of the box because they will go like, well, this is an internal maybe, you know, access and this will never go this, and XYZ. So what we have to do in some of these cases are actually bring the threat model to the table and the architecture and explain, your system is connected to another system, and that looks like this in a bigger picture, and the real threat to the business might not be directly from this component, but might come from a different component that gets through and then comes into your system and does damage. So basically translating the cybersecurity technical risks into engineering terms, into architectural terms, but also I think very, very important to translate it to your leadership. What does that mean in terms of business? Like if your leadership is not on board, if you go to your leadership and just present technical facts, hey, I prevented this month 10,000 vulnerabilities, or I remediated, it doesn't mean much to them. But if you say, I made my product so much more secure, and people who are looking at our products and trying to find vulnerabilities to hack us will not be doing that. And we are preventing actually financial loss with our activities. But basically, not only bringing everybody together, but also translating and speaking each stakeholder's language to understand and for them to come on board and be actually part of the journey.
Yeah, it's a great point. We often talk about the value at risk when talking to sort of C-levels, and then some great advice that we give, which was the advice that we received, is sort of have a messaging board, and get ready with the different messages to the different stakeholders, and then depending on who you're talking to, have that ready before you go into the room. So did you want to add something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, when I was when I
Go
was a younger professional and when I started my career, I didn't know better. I would go to the engineers and say, you have to comply with the security requirements that I'm telling you. And they would just look at me and be like, no, we're not. Or they would challenge it or would be like, why? And then, I didn't know what to say, saying because I said so. It's kind of rude to say, but I would be go like basically they would stonewall, and I didn't know how to handle it as a young professional starting out, right? Now with over the years, I learned how to talk each and every stakeholder's own language. I'm much more successful at communicating and getting what I want. So yeah.
And was it Chris or
Yeah.
Sachin? Somebody, yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, the only other thing I just is the discussion is I was thinking that one of the things from we talk about people being a risk, certainly people, process, and technology, people are the least predictable, I guess, out of those. But one of the things I think that manufacturing companies have that they can use is, years ago, we tied safety and security. And so it's a core value, to protect our employees, both physically and to protect, certainly from a cyber event, you could really see, how cyber could have a safety impact to the company. And so, once we establish it as a value, then we start using it, like we start meetings with safety tips, that's typical for manufacturing. Now we do safety, be safe, be secure. And so we may do a cyber related topic too. So it's something I think you could lean into if you're in the manufacturing space. And, I think I assume all of us, safety is always a top priority for manufacturing. So it's an easy thing to lean into. And then the other one is, you got to know when you've got to pull and try to encourage people to engage. And then obviously you need to provide training, but sometimes you got to push too. And if people do unsecure acts, it's kind of like if they did unsafe things in the plant, at some point they're going to get terminated. And so you have to balance when to pull and when to push. But I think that you have to do both, honestly.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a good point as well.
Yeah, be able to talk about the risk side as a way of a safety issue or something that's not that's impacting the availability or the operational time. I think that would help a long way talking in that language.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we could go on forever, but we've come to the end of the allotted time for this session. So I want to thank all our panel members, Sachin, Manolya, Reynaldo, and Chris. Thank you very much for the amazing insights and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. Really, really appreciate it.